Coming up next on the Holistic Wealth Podcast.
Cockroaches are a really big issue. So there's like 50 variety of cockroaches. Some of the worst ones for allergens tend to be the cockroach from Germany and also the one from America. Go figure. But the point is that with those allergens, whether it be from their feces, whether it be from their bodies themselves, whether it be from their saliva or their skin, it can cause problems. Especially they go to areas such as the kitchen, dining room. Those sort of areas are important to make sure you're looking around. Now, how do you treat them? How do you treat this issue, especially when you have kids that are affected with allergies?
You're listening to the Holistic Wealth Podcast with host Keisha Blair, author of Holistic Wealth and founder of the Institute on Holistic Wealth. And now, here's your host, Keisha Blair.
Today, we have a very special guest with us. We have Dr. Ken Redcross. And Dr. Redcross is the author of Bond, the 4 cornerstones of a lasting and caring relationship with your doctor, and founder of a unique concierge service providing patient-first treatment through strategic health services. Dr. Redcross earned his MD from Columbia Presbyterian Medical Center in New York, specializing in internal medicine. And you can check out his website at drkenredcross.com. Ken, welcome to the show. It's great to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
And he's here for part 2 of our series on cold and flu season, getting prepared, and also staying well through this season. I know a lot of people have concerns already about the upcoming cold and flu season. And so for this part 2, we're going to focus on kids of all ages. Just because I'm a mom, I wanted to give that time because I remember having young kids who went through all sorts of things. I have one who's asthmatic, one who struggled through bronchitis through cold and season, and the one who's asthmatic, tends to get swollen lungs during cold and flu season. So I know a lot of parents tend to get very flustered. It's a very stressful time, and it can be a very stressful time for parents. So just having this part 2, just to help them cope through. I mean, a lot of kids are already fussy. So when it comes on to cold and flu season, I know a lot of parents who live in the emergency room, and it's no good being there because you feel like you're going to pick up something yourself. So Dr. Redcross, thank you so much for allowing us to just expand on, taking care of kids through this cold and flu season. I know a lot of parents will be appreciative. So I know in part 1, we touched on a bit in terms of preventative and managing for kids. So for part 2, I just wanted to go a bit in depth because I know, for instance, that younger kids struggle more. They have smaller airways. They tend to be congested more. I just remember being in that stage of just, like, the kids were coming home from daycare constantly sick every single day. It was like a cycling cold and flu season. Sure. I could barely get to work. Like it was
you and me both. You and me both. And,
Exactly.
and if you guys saw episode 1, I have twins.
Right.
So one would get the other one sick when one got better. So I know where you are. So I'm here to help you with the pain.
Okay, absolutely.
So one of the things that's really important, especially as parents and having younger children, we talked about some of the things on the homeopathic side that are very supportive in the acute phase when these things first start. I like to say within the first 24 to 48 hours, the oscillococcinum for flu-like symptoms. It's hard because the kids don't necessarily say, hey, mom and dad, I have body aches, but you see them and you see they're a little more listless.
Right.
They're not moving so much. So then we kind of have to put on our doctor hat at home and say, maybe there is a little bit more than a cold. Then I mentioned cold calm. Once again, when I'm talking about cold calm and a child with a sore throat, the child needs to be 4 years of age and older versus for Oscillo, the kid needs to be 2 years of age and older.
Okay.
The other thing that's important for us as parents is that we need to keep our life simple as well. So those things are great to on the go. Those are things that aren't going to spill because they're not a whole bunch of liquids and so forth that you can't measure. The other thing I want us to keep in mind as parents, especially with younger children, is I usually say within the first 48 hours. Sometimes I used to say, Keisha, the first 3 days, but healthcare has gotten a little wacky to get in and see your doctor. It's a little harder. So it's that first 2 days. If your child is not kind of turning the corner, time to get in and see someone, hopefully your doctor or maybe in an urgent care if you can't get in, but you need to make sure because just like you said, when our kids are really tiny or they have asthma, some of those conditions, they can really change quickly, really quickly. And we want to get on that early and often.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. And that's such great advice. It's just bringing back all sorts of I'm sure for you too. I don't know if your kids are past that stage of twins now. They must be. But for me, it's bringing back, I'm thinking about the ER and everything, being there with the kids. And then I remember my doctor saying to me, well, if the mucus turns green, then we have a problem.
Okay, I love all doctors, but I will just change that a bit.
Right.
What we have learned, everyone, is that when you see that mucus, if it is green, that's usually related to the age of the mucus. So don't think that means my child needs an antibiotic. Number one, we need to decrease our need for antibiotics or our use of antibiotics anyway. You know why? Because antibiotics, everyone, are only for bacteria. We're talking cold and flu. Does nothing for those.
Right.
Nothing at all. So we really shouldn't be getting a prescription for an antibiotic anyway. But when you see the color of the mucus, remember, that doesn't mean that means I need an antibiotic for my child now. No, just older mucus. Keep the airways clear. Making sure you're staying hydrated, incredibly important for children. I mentioned it for adults because obviously it's important. But with a child, you don't always know that they're not properly hydrated unless you're actually looking at their skin or you're a little bit skilled with that. So you want to make sure you're keeping your child hydrated throughout the cold or the flu. Just make sure you keep that at the top of your mind.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so any other advice, doctor, for instance, for parents who have kids with asthma, like myself, my son is generally growing out of it seems, if that's really a thing. But he used to get swollen lungs. I'd be in the doctor's office because of swollen lungs, and it was always in cold and flu. It was always a difficult time. So just wondering with precautions for them.
So it is a thing. Yeah, your child can sort of grow out of asthma that's bad. They can they will always kind of have asthma, but it can be more manageable. So yes, it can. But that also gets back to having a humidifier in the house.
Right.
That just helps with the cough and cold and flu season, but especially for my asthmatics, because we don't know the particulate matter that's in the air or what's going on that really causes a flare-up. The other thing, coming from a huge animal lover, when you have those animals, you need to make sure that you're cleaning up behind them and you're vacuuming and that sort of thing during this time of year as well, especially if you have a child who typically gets these respiratory infections and that sort of thing. So that's incredibly important also.
Yeah, no, that's for sure. That's great. And I also suffer from allergies, which a lot of kids do suffer from too. Is it the kind of the same advice then for parents of kids who have allergies? Say looking around things in the house, clearing out vents, especially. I remember having to clean out vents very often for that, and looking at any other allergens in the house that might be causing any kind of response. Anything else or was it basically just kind of the same for the asthmatics as, people who suffer from allergies?
Very similar, because it tends to be two big offenders. It tends to be either environmental or something that's in the house, right? Something that's coming from the outside for those who have issues with allergy or those that have increased dander from the animals that I mentioned or what have you. Also in New York, it's, New York's very different, everyone. And there is a bug issue, a cockroach issue in some apartment complexes and so forth, where we see increased asthma. Why? Because there's also cockroaches. They're very allergenic. Some of the worst ones for allergens tend to be the cockroach from Germany and also the one from America. Go figure. But the point is that with those allergens, whether it be from their feces, whether it be from their bodies themselves, whether it be from their saliva or their skin, it can cause problems. Especially they go to areas such as the kitchen, kind of the dining room. Those sort of areas are important to make sure you're looking around. Now, how do you treat them? How do you treat this issue, especially when you have kids that are affected with allergies or even grown-ups? You're making sure if it's a hardwood floor, you're using a damp mop. Or if it's going to be something like carpet, you're going to obviously vacuum frequently. So it's one of those things that you don't really think about when you talk about allergies and so forth. But think about them. Cockroaches, they're usually big enough to see. But if you don't see them, when you have someone in a house that isn't really getting better, think about cockroaches. Don't forget, there are over 50 varieties. But the point is, we're talking things within the home that we can do our best to control this time of year for cold and flu or for those allergies. So it just depends whether you're out in the country or in the city. There's different ways that we all deal with kind of the same problem, but they all typically are the same management. Making sure that you're cleaning down, making sure you have a humidifier, making sure you're vacuuming, and doing your best to kind of manage all of those during this time.
You know, as we talked about in part 1, and you mentioned in this episode too, any remedies that we could use, I'm just wondering if there's anything else you can think of on the homeopathic front that is also very useful, or is it just basically that both sets that you mentioned earlier are also very good with also dealing with things like allergens and like asthma or anything else with kids? Is there anything else that you would recommend?
You know, there is. You know, it's interesting you said that, because on the homeopathic side, there's a wonderful homeopathic remedy called sinus calm. I'd have to get back to you, Keisha, as far as the best ages for that, but I do know that children can take that as well as far as the best. So make sure you can look online or boiron.com or boiron.com to get the actual age group. But I do know that is incredibly effective. Once again, on the homeopathic side, without that drowsiness. Think about this. How many times do we need these allergy meds and they make us sleepy, or you can't drive with them, can't do all this? So when you're looking at something like homeopathy, and when we talk about the cold and flu and the acute phase, that means the early phase of all this, and something for sinuses, once again, guys, the whole point is to try to stay closer to the earth without all of these prescriptions and things that interact with this and interact with that, to give that a shot first. And then if something else declares itself, or we aren't where we need to be or want to be, then we make sure we have a talk with the doctor within that first 48-hour window to say, hey, doc, I've been trying this stuff. It's working well. Am I missing anything? But once again, most of my patients get better within that first 48 hours.
Yeah, no, and that's amazing. And so if people are listening in and they're thinking, well, I've never taken these homeopathic medicines before, what's in them? Like, is it like, you know, you mentioned was closer to the earth. What would you say in terms of like people who never tried them before, who are maybe on the fence? Is there anything that you can tell them in terms of how well they work and kind of like the key ingredients that make them as effective as they are?
So I'm glad that you asked that, because, for instance, with the solococcinum, there's a lot of documented studies as far as how it, especially within the first 48-hour window. That's why I mentioned that before, because that's where the data was wonderful and robust for you to really understand. You know, homeopathy is almost I like to almost call it a spiritual sort of remedy, in the sense that it works in this early phase of what goes on with our bodies, but they have something like, it's called like similar. So when you have similar symptoms, there's certain things in homeopathy that can almost in a way mimic those symptoms and bring health and healing. So I love the fact that I don't have to worry about it interacting and causing any problems when I do have to use my prescription pad for a diabetic who may need metformin. It's okay. I can go ahead and give that prescription for metformin for that diabetic, but know that he or she says, hey, doc, I'm feeling like I'm coming down with something. Can I take Oscillo? And I can say with a good conscience, yeah, absolutely. And I can also say, I'm almost certain you're going to get better. And that makes me feel good too.
Yeah, no, that's amazing to hear. My dad is also diabetic. And I know, for instance, even just recently, they've had to switch up his medication, stop him from taking something else because there was an interaction that they didn't realize. So that's also good to know for everyone to know.
And I'll say one more thing, Keisha, and everyone out there listening. So don't forget, I am a Western trained physician. I train here at Columbia in New York. So this isn't doom and gloom with all medications. This is just letting you know that there are some other alternatives out there for us that can lead to health and healing that's just closer to the earth as well, that when necessary can be married with the Western medicines that I can talk about and educate on as well. So it's about a partnership for your health to stay well. So that's why it's so important to share some of these things that maybe some of you didn't know today, but now you know you kind of have something else in your toolkit, especially for those who have children.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think this was great in terms of educating and informing everyone about even that 48-hour window that you mentioned. A lot of parents, I'm sure, didn't know that. And so that's great information heading into this cold and flu season. I mean, we're already in the thick of it and will be for another couple months. So that's great for parents of kids who are watching out for these symptoms and are questioning whether it's time to go in. But at least we know, you know what, that first 48 hours is critical.
It is.
And it's, you know, it's time to act when we see any changes. So Dr. Redcross, where can people find you? And some of the products that you've talked about, like can you tell us where we can find you? And also, if people are interested in accessing some of these remedies, where they
So look, and I really mean this, everyone. Please feel free to say hello, Dr. Redcross or Dr. Ken Redcross, as far as on Instagram, on Facebook, or LinkedIn. I get people all the time who ask questions, and I love answering them. So try me and say hello. When you're looking at some of the homeopathic remedies, luckily it's wonderful. They're in Whole Foods or Sprouts or all of your kind of CVS. So a lot of your places all around the U.S. and even in Canada. And there's also their website, which is boiron.com, BOIRON.com, maybe borironusa.com. And that way you can also get educated on some of these things. And more importantly, they are over the counter. They don't require a doctor's visit. They don't require a prescription. But we know within that first 48-hour window, we now have some options, and they just happen to be some homeopathic ones to consider first.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you so much for that. I know I've tried the products with my kids and they loved it.
Me too.
At least I wasn't having, red spots on my carpet for one. So that's amazing. I don't know, maybe I'm clumsy. Maybe
No, you're normal, Keisha. That's all. I have the red spots in the Redcross household too. I used to.
So we thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Redcross. Thank you so much. It was amazing having you here. Hopefully we can get you back on the show in the future to discuss other things. There's so much to discuss in health, and everybody's still concerned about their health. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you. Take care, everyone. Be well and happy holidays.
The Holistic Wealth Podcast with Keisha Blair is brought to you by... Have you joined the Institute on Holistic Wealth? If you haven't already, what are you waiting for? Choose your membership plan at the Institute on Holistic Wealth/memberships to join. As a member, you'll get access to free worksheets, advice, coaching, and an intentional design workshop. As you start to live a more holistically wealthy lifestyle, you'll want to stay for a very long time. So go to Institute on Holistic Wealth/memberships to join. If you haven't read the book yet, pick up a copy of the award-winning best-selling Holistic Wealth 36 Life Lessons to help you recover from disruption, find your life purpose, and achieve financial freedom.